Good morning, everybody. Gandang umaga po. Ohayou gozaimasu to our friends from Japan. Omiya-san, Omiya-sensei, Takuji-sensei, Hirokawa-sensei, and from our friends from the Japanese Embassy, Honda-san, nice to see you again. Thank you for your support to our activities. My name is Joel Marciano Jr. I'm the acting director of the DOST-STII. I'm also a professor at the University of the Philippines. And to our guests from Japan, may I say, dozo yoroshiku onegaishimasu. Thank you for making the best effort to come here and still catch the start of our workshop on time, despite the obvious challenges of typhoon, which we all, of course, share together. And I'm not sure if Kamuri is a Japanese name. Is it? It sounds like a Japanese name. Yes. Well, maybe we should know also, earlier this year, Japan was severely affected by another typhoon, Hagibis, which is actually a Filipino name. So I don't know if there's some reciprocity happening there, but it's certainly not a laughing matter, but I just noted it's some kind of coincidence. Yes. So thank you. Thank you for your effort. Now let me talk about, by way of a message, this our agency, ASTI, and our role in all of these events. We are very happy that we are co-organizing with De La Salle University and UP, the very first Philippines-Japan workshop, in this case on wireless radio and antenna technologies. You should know that this has been happening between Japan and other countries in ASEAN for the past few years. Japan, Thailand, Japan, Vietnam, Japan, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, various technological fronts, and this is the first time we are holding it in the Philippines. And so we decided to hold it in a grander fashion. We are in a hotel, we're not in a classroom. There are pros and cons to both, right? But we hope to sustain this every year. And this is just the beginning. Next year, we are eagerly looking forward to other universities who may be present here to help organize this event and to sustain it. So fortunately, ASTI has a little bit of budget this year so that we can hold it in this hotel. And but next year, maybe other universities in the Philippines can also provide support. Okay, let me talk about ASTI. We are Research and Development Institute, RDI, of the DOST, created in 1987. Our focus is on ICTs. Of course, wireless is under that umbrella. Microelectronics, and now, evidently, space technology. Okay. So this is a snapshot of various thrusts, programs, projects, activities that ASTI has had over the past 30 years. You see there the map of the Philippines in the top right, and the dots there represent weather stations developed and deployed by ASTI. We've had quite a number of unfortunate downtimes with these stations, especially with the past typhoon, but we try our best to maintain it. So you see they're scattered all over the Philippines, these weather sensing devices that are sending data every 30 minutes or less. And you see there a picture of our rooftop with a ground receiving station, and that is a recent development. We now have 2 of these. Those antennas are for Earth observation satellites. They're not for telecommunications, but rather they are for tracking satellites that that obtain pictures of the Earth. So Earth observation is a tracking satellite. Okay? And the one in the middle, maybe if this laser pointer works, I can, right there, is a project under SATREPS with support from JST and JICA for the deployment of 50 lightning monitoring stations and weather stations just in Metro Manila. So the idea is, by measuring lightning, we can have a better model by which we can predict or model extreme weather events in the metropolis. Okay, so smaller weather patterns that affect cities or airports, etc. And by the hypothesis is, by measuring lightning, which is, of course, has an electromagnetic component, you can try to come up with a better model for these thunderstorms. So that is going to be completed middle of next year. And we also run a research and education network for the Philippines. We call it PJWWRAT. You see there connectivity to various institutions in the Philippines and also abroad. And the highlight of this is a high-speed link between the Philippines and Japan. Two of them, one courtesy of MAFIN, the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, Fisheries in Japan, and also one connected to the server in Japan, and with NICT providing data that is used in the Himawari satellite. I can show you that in a moment. And yeah, so various other activities. Here is our high-performance computer, a supercomputer inside in a shipping container behind our building. Of course, we have been contributing to the development of small satellites. These are our weather stations. That's our 10-meter semi-anechoic chamber near the airport, which tests for electronic products. And recently, it has obtained ISO certification. So we now have can offer these services, of course, globally. And it's to help the local semiconductor electronics industries. And now in the picture is a full anechoic chamber, which is a recent development. So if you're very interested in antennas and wireless, you can avail of this facility in the university. It's a full anechoic chamber. It's a near-field measurement. It transforms it to far-field, can measure antenna patterns. Okay, so now you can close the loop in your antenna design. You're no longer stuck to just simulations, but you can fabricate your antenna, and you can even measure its pattern, right? And then you can make modifications to the design as necessary. Okay, that is summarized here. Let me just go through this quickly. So underlying infrastructure is our connectivity. In order to collaborate, not just within the Philippines, but also with other countries, we need high-speed networks. And the difference between this network and commodity internet is that it doesn't prioritize so much commodity internet, rather it is for research traffic. And I should say, that is one metric that's being used to rank countries. How much research traffic is your research education network carrying? So that means if it's carrying a lot of traffic corresponding to video conferencing of researchers, exchange of data, access to supercomputers, and the like, not necessarily to commodity internet, it's an indicator of the technological level of technological activity in a country. Right? So that is our advocacy as well in setting up PJWWRAT, to promote this scientific productivity in the Philippines with this underlying infrastructure. On top of that, there is the core, Computing and Archiving Research Environment, which is our high-performance computer facility that is accessible from members of the PJWWRAT and outside. It is used also by international organizations like the International Rice Research Institute, and they were able to perform the sequencing of rice genomes by connecting remotely from Los Baños, about 60 kilometers away, using a 1 gigabit per second link direct to ASTI to use these HPCs. It also hosts a science catalog and a data repository. I mentioned Pedro. Pedro is our Philippine Earth Data Resource Observation Center. That is the ground receiving stations for satellite imagery. Not just from our own satellites, but satellites of other countries and commercial satellites. So these are generators of data, and side by side with a high-performance computing facility. And lastly here, field sensors is the collection of all of those weather stations scattered all over the country. ULA, understanding lightning and thunderstorms, refers to the 50 lightning sensors being deployed in Metro Manila. Okay, so all of this supports what we call societal applications, and this is just a sample of them. I mentioned rice research, telemedicine, disaster risk reduction and mitigation. And well, connectivity is important, right? So really it's about building the science infrastructure that supports societal applications in the Philippines. So our research is geared towards creating impact in society. Okay. Himawari was mentioned. So one of the features of the science infrastructure is that it facilitates connectivity to the servers in Japan from the NICT, the National Information Communications Technology Center in Japan. They host the data of the Himawari satellite. So if you can click on that image, sorry, can you click on that image? And it will give you, it will lead you, does it open a browser? Yeah, can you show the browser, please? because of the 10 gigabit per second link between Japan and ASTI, you can access this data almost in real time, and we're getting transfers of this data. Is it showing? Is this the website? Not yet? Okay. But in case you spend more time on this, you can just go to himawari.asti.dost.gov.ph, and over here, if you click on this, you will see the 24-hour time lapse of the view from space of the satellite. And you can go back one day by clicking on this, and you can see the typhoon crossing the Philippines, right? The actual view from space. And it's not an animation created, it's not a drawing, it's actually the view from the Himawari 8 satellite of Japan. This is the same satellite used also by Pag-asa in weather forecasting, and they interpret the data. In this website, we do not render any interpretation. It is not our job to do so, but rather it's just to create awareness in terms of reaching the public, right? That there are resources like this that can keep them informed. And the next step is for them to visit the Pag-asa website, so to get advisories. Okay, so anyway, let's skip that. It's supposed to work. Okay. Is this already the live one? No? Okay, never mind. Okay, now closer to the theme of this conference, one of the activities within ASTI is a lot of spectrum measurement. How is radio spectrum being used in the country? So we approach that using various ways. We have invested in a high-end system. This is a National Instruments PXI system, a software-defined radio that can really not just measure spectrum. It can, through complex algorithms, try to identify signals and identify modulations. And you can record RF signals over the air, deconstruct them, and do high-level processing, high-order statistics to try to detect intelligence. So it's not just the presence or absence of signals over the air, but rather what kind of signals are being transmitted and are they of good quality. So that's a research task. Then we also want to democratize it by building low-cost sensors for crowdsourced measurement. Essentially, on our phones, we can measure spectrum occupancy, but only using the radios inside the phone. And that is maybe GSM, 3G, 4G, LTE, Wi-Fi. But there are other radio systems like TV, broadcast, and all other systems occupying the spectrum that we need to measure. So this is a software, this is an implementation by which we can mount on vehicles. We even mounted it on roll-on, roll-off ships as they traverse the sea lanes in the Philippines to measure spectrum occupancy. Okay. And we have also built our own prototypes for software-defined radio. We call them shares. Now, spectrum is, of course, a valuable. Why are we doing this? Spectrum is a valuable national resource, and this is a slide from. This is data from 2004. I could not refresh it, but this is U.S. spectrum. Right? $771 billion worth. So they were comparing it to the worth of, let's say, Bill Gates and McDonald's, etc. That's how much economic activity comes out from utilization of radio spectrum. Of course, that is probably much less than what it is now, because this is 2004, but it's just an indication of how much spectrum is worth. Somebody can do this calculation for the Philippines, an economist can do it and see the impact of spectrum, and therefore it's very important that the management of this resource is properly undertaken. Okay. So with spectrum, in the Philippines, there are many places with no connectivity, so there are groups in the universities that try to address that in their own way by building open source community cellular networks. This is a picture of an actual tower that they built themselves to serve a rural area. In this case here, this is Manila, and very near Manila actually, you have this Aurora province where you see pockets of connectivity, but otherwise it's really not served. So but there are people living there are schools that are in those areas that do not have connectivity. So therefore, a model for providing this connectivity is to community-owned, community-managed cellular networks. Right? But then, so that we also tried, with ASTI, we tried to contribute to this effort by converting our meteorological buoys into communication relays. So let's say the connectivity is present here, but there is no connectivity here. How can you reach that? There's a very big mountain here. So we deploy our buoy here and try to use a relay and we use techniques to stabilize and to respond to the wave movement to stabilize the signal. And so that is the research area being done there. And this was presented in the recent global HTC conference in Seattle, I think earlier this year, right? And maybe later in the sessions you'll hear more about this work. And so they were able to place calls, they were able to connect to the internet using this backhaul, experimental backhaul link. Okay. So now our research is ultimately hopefully leading to repurposing spectrum, because systems like this, community cellular, buoys like that, do not have any spectrum to use. It's an unconventional system. So how do you sustain this? You need to have your own spectrum. A TV white space is one possibility by using gaps in the TV spectrum. But in order to propose that, in order for that to happen, we need to support that with measurements, evidence, scientific evidence that would support a new policy. So that is our thrust. Okay? Regionally repurposing radio spectrum to enable more inclusive nationwide wireless connectivity. Okay, so we have been making these measurements. You see here, an urban area occupied a lot of TV stations. That's Quezon City. Rather suburban area, fewer TV stations, and really rural area, no TV broadcasts. Maybe just 2, right? So you can take advantage of these gaps here. It's not otherwise not being utilized, but in order for that policy to take effect, we need to have measurements. We need to support that with evidence. Okay. Now, we're so excited by this work, we thought, why don't we take it to the next level? And maybe my next few slides, just to run through a few of these, is to update you on recent development. We were so excited by this, I said we want to bring it to the next level. Literally, the next level is space. So then, enter SMOSIS, spectrum monitoring from space, with ICEEP. ICEEP is a module, an outdoor deck in the Japanese Kibo module in the ISS, International Space Station. It's an exposed deck by which they're offering us to deploy instruments on that deck. Right? Instead of launching satellites, you can bring your instrument to the International Space Station and you can deploy it. Right? So our idea is capturing and mapping the digital divide from space through radio frequency spectrum measurements. So shout out to my colleagues here. Mar de Guzman is here, going to present later. James was the one who went to travel to Japan last week to present it. Calvin is here as well, one of the organizers. You'll hear from them later. So very quickly, forward. Okay, so why not do it in space? This is the International Space Station. You see an outdoor deck like this? It's really there for instruments. And you can mount an instrument there to face down to the Earth and make measurements. Cameras, magnetic field experiments, etc. Why not radio spectrum? Okay. So this is, we want to put, essentially the idea is to put a spectrum analyzer in space. A broadband radio, software-defined radio or spectrum measurement with a high-gain antenna, and we expect to generate this much data per day, this much data per year, okay? And then the goal is to develop some kind of a heat map, a spectrum heat map, with which you can see where the connectivity is and where the connectivity is not. So satellites exist that measure something like this, but not electromagnetic spectrum, but light lights. So the VIR satellite measure night lights. By measuring night lights, you can see where there's electricity and where there is none. Now, we want to measure where the radio spectrum is being used, TV broadcasts, cellular, etc., to complement that data. To overlay it, you see places where there is electricity, but there's no connectivity, right? And so it enhances the picture of the so-called digital divide. Okay. So that is our goal. This is just a drawing. I should advise the team that this flag needs to be reoriented differently, because if it's facing down like this, it should be, anyway. This is a mechanical layout of our payload, proposed payload on the ISS. Okay? And the goal really is to address sustainable development goals, the SDG, in particular, reducing inequalities, SDG number 10. We must work to close the digital divide where more than half the world has limited or no access to the internet. So that is the words of the UN Secretary General. Okay, I have 2 minutes left. So there's a block diagram, initial block diagram of our system. Okay, we've done the leak budget analysis. Of course, it's very relevant here. In order to measure signals from space that are terrestrial, the antennas are really pointing down to Earth. Talk about cellular base stations, they're not pointing up to space, they're pointing down to Earth. Can you still measure them from 400 kilometers up? So it's promising, it's not quite there yet. We need a higher gain antenna, we need amplifiers, but we did the initial calculations. You see that there. Okay. That's all part of the paperwork that we need to do in order to apply for this opportunity. Okay, of course there is also a power budget. In order to put something in the space station, you can't consume a lot of power. 8 watts is the budget. And weight budget, 2 kilos. So we think we can meet that power and mass budget. And so here's the ISS. It goes over the Earth. We have our antenna pointing down to the Earth, measuring signals like towers like this, antennas pointing down, and then it stores the data. We can download it, the ground segment, and then we share the data. Okay. So where do we proceed with this? We actually applied this idea in the Mission Idea Contest of UNISEC. And last week, so we were a finalist. We were fortunate enough to be chosen a finalist. And last week was the final presentation. So you can go to spacemic.net. You can see all the entries, the finalists there. And you'll see our entry there. And I'm happy to report that this team won. So they were the champions of the MIC6. So that's a certificate. Thank you very much. Credit goes to the team. But let me tell you what this means. It doesn't mean we get automatically the free ride. It's only a subsidy. They're only going to pay for part of the cost to get to put our payload in the ISS. We have to come up with half of the money at least, right? In order to build this. First, we have to build the payload. We already have some idea of that. And then we have to bring it to the ISS. That means it has to go into a rocket. We have to pay for the rocket. Also, maybe some subsidy there. I hope, well, DOST, of course, is here, and I'm part of DOST. We are going to apply for funding. Perhaps our Japanese embassy might also be able to have some support. But we're halfway there. We're less than halfway there. We want to run this experiment by the latter part of 2020, staying in the ISS for 1 year. And the data that we collect is going to be publicly available. We want to share it with everyone so people can look at it as big data. They can make all sorts of correlation with this data. They can plot it. They can render interpretation on it. And then hopefully it can further be refined in future missions to have more accuracy, to have more resolution in the measurements, and better performance. Okay, so that's the end of my sharing. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much. And arigatou gozaimasu.